thank you, everyone, for being here. I'd like to welcome all of you, Chairman Lowe, Margaret, the Hong Kong Development Trade Corporation. We are thrilled as a city to host you. My name is Michael Sachs, and I'm here today in my role as Vice Chairman of World Business Chicago. World Business Chicago is a public-private partnership chaired by Mayor Emanuel with a board of directors that consists of the leaders of close to 70 of Chicago's leading businesses. And we're charged with leading economic development efforts, including the creation and maintenance of our regional business plan, regional economic development plan, and our corporate attraction and retention activities. Jeff Malhorn, I'd like to acknowledge, is the president of World Business Chicago, is here with us and has done a great job partnering with Hong Kong Trade Development Corporation to put this conference on, and so we're very grateful. I think at WBC we have learned a lot from, we've learned a lot, Margaret, from you, and we are envious of your capabilities and your reach, and we look forward to the time when we can put a conference like this on in Hong Kong and travel with this kind of a traveling band the way you have been doing the last several days. On behalf of Mayor Emanuel, who I know will address us later, and the city, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone today. And I just want to mention that in addition to serving as the vice chair of WBC, I'm the chief executive officer of GCM Grosvenor, which is a $50 billion AUM asset manager based here in Chicago. And in that capacity, I can speak to the topic of our panel very directly and very personally, because we are an overseas company that has found success in Asia through Hong Kong. And I can speak firsthand with regard to the quality and ease and talent that we've been able to access in our Hong Kong office and our ability to serve not only Hong Kong, not only China, but greater Asia from that Hong Kong operation. We all know that an important element of keeping Chicago a leading global city is to have strong international partnerships, and one of our most important and most critical international partnerships is with China, and Hong Kong is the gateway to that relationship and is critical to that partnership. As two leading global cities, we believe that we have a lot in common with Hong Kong. In particular, we believe, as the conference highlights, Hong Kong is a critical gateway to Asia, not just China, but all of Asia, just as Chicago is a critical gateway to North America. We currently have an $800 million trading relationship with Hong Kong. We have 94 Chicago companies, Chicago headquarter companies based in Hong Kong, and we are thrilled to have 3 different airlines flying direct between Chicago and Hong Kong, and we're particularly happy when Cathay started their service a couple of years ago. With all the strong connections with Hong Kong, we hope that this conference will help spur even greater partnership between the two cities and between China and Chicago. We have a $34 billion trade relationship with China each year. Over 60 Chinese companies with operations here in Chicago and 170 Chicago companies located there. And O'Hare Airport, our center for air travel, processes more than a quarter of all of the air export market to China. So 25% of everything that goes to China goes through our system here. And with this strong partnership, the mayor has made it a priority of his international strategy to work closely with China. Since taking office, we've had literally dozens of important delegations come through Chicago. We've been honored to host 2 vice premiers, just as we're honored to host the chief executive this week. And we've traveled to Beijing, where we became the first U.S. city to sign what's called a Gateway City Agreement, but a partnership cooperation agreement between the city of Chicago and a number of cities. We've seen investment increase. In particular, we're very excited about Wanda Corporation's investment, $900 million development here in town. And we were honored to host the JCCT conference here in Chicago last year, a conference that Secretary of Commerce Pritzker and Undersecretary Selig wanted to see here in Chicago and wanted to see outside of the capital, in a city, in a vibrant economy, getting closer to business that is so critical to trade. Building on that conference, continued growth in trade, continued growth in investment, and our ability to host you today. So thank you very much for that, and again, welcome. We've got a terrific panel. Secretary Stefan Selig, Undersecretary Selig, is the Undersecretary of Commerce for International Trade, and our trade strategy and our trade priorities land squarely on his desk. Prior to his service at the Commerce Department, Undersecretary Selig was Executive Vice Chairman and Global Corporate and Investment Banking at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. So very high, very significant, successful private sector executive who is now working to promote trade. Morgan McGrath is Managing Director and Head of International Banking at JPMorgan. Morgan has extensive experience working in Asia, having spent 8 years in the region, notably as head of JPMorgan's business in Singapore and Indonesia. And Gebhard Rainer. Gebhard is the President and COO of Coach, and is somewhat new to that position after having spent a fair amount of time here in Chicago with Hyatt Hotels, another great global corporate citizen of Chicago. And we're thrilled to have all three of you with us today. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to start, Gebhard, with you, and each of the panelists will make some introductory remarks. Undersecretary Selig spoke this morning to the greater group, so we will end with him, and then we'll open up for questions and dialogue. So, Gebhard.
Good morning, and it's great to be back in Chicago. It's great to be here. It's also great, thanks Michael for the introduction, it's also great to be on a panel just before lunch rather than right after lunch, because the adrenaline should be at a high level right now for everybody to pay attention as to what we hopefully are able to convey here in terms of the business platform Hong Kong. And what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of background information as to how Coach, from a global distribution perspective, has approached this, and then some of my personal relationships between Hong Kong and Chicago, and where I'm based now, New York. Coach has been doing business in Asia for over 30 years. Coach is a very much New York based company, leatherwear company, fashion leatherwear company. We are 75 years old and have expanded internationally, originally into Japan, but very early going into Hong Kong, using Hong Kong as a platform to develop our China and Southeast Asia business. Hong Kong for Coach has been extremely important and very supportive in terms of setting up that platform to get into China, but also establishing a retail network in Hong Kong that today is one of our key networks in terms of, and I think it was mentioned in the earlier sessions this morning, in terms of the creativity and the innovative approach that Hong Kong has that attracts a lot of talent. It's, by example, for us today, very, very easy to get our designers to travel to Hong Kong and use Hong Kong as a platform to go into China, where we have our sample making facilities and we have our laboratories there for product testing, because Hong Kong is such a stimulating, creative environment. So designers love to travel there, they love to stay there. It obviously is an environment that's from a expatriate professional setup perspective, a much more preferred environment to live as a living platform. We have our supply chain structure set up in Hong Kong, our supply chain that we originally established in China. In the meantime, it's a distributed supply chain from a manufacturing point of view, with a small manufacturing base in China, a manufacturing base in Vietnam, in Myanmar, and in the Philippines, all serviced through a supply chain management setup in Hong Kong. We're processing about 34 million pieces of product every year through that Asian manufacturing base globally. And all that is done through a management setup in Hong Kong. We have 2 office setups in Hong Kong, one for retail operations that has components of support functions for our Japanese operations, our Tokyo office, as well as support functions for our mainland China operations, where we have an office in Shanghai as well. The second office in Hong Kong is really our supply chain organization that supports anything to do with our supply chain and has support functions such as human resources and IT located there as well, which play a big role for us. The interesting part from a platform, a Hong Kong platform perspective, is that it really has transformed over the last 20, 25 years, where originally it was a logistics distribution main hub as well. And I think from a logistics point of view, as Jim pointed out in the earlier panel discussions, it still is a very, very important destination for us. It has also become, from a management aspect, from a management perspective, a distribution managing hub. What I mean by that is that we have set up distribution centers in Hong Kong originally, and then have distributed distribution centers into mainland China, into Korea, into Taiwan, and into Japan, and manage it through our hub in Hong Kong. And it has proven to be very, very efficient and successful. We produce most of our samples, and samples are, in retail, sample production is a very important part of the production chain. We produce most of our samples in China today, in Dongguan, where we have a fairly large facility where we produce samples, where we have a very large laboratory as well for product testing and material testing. All of that is supported out of Hong Kong, with expertise out of Hong Kong and a local platform in Dongguan as well. We have overall currently a network of 18 retail stores in Hong Kong alone. There are 3 additional stores in Macau. Overall in Asia today, we operate close to 400 retail stores that we directly operate, where we own the operation, we lease property, and we own the operation as to how we manage the operation. Out of that close to 400, about half of this is between mainland China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Macau. And it's a growing operation. The Greater China area is still a very much evolving area for us from a retail perspective, from the modern luxury, accessible luxury perspective. Currently, within Coach, it's ranked number 3 in terms of sales. It's very quickly catching up to become number 2. Number 2 at the moment is Japan. Japan is the second largest operation we have, but China, in our estimates, is going to overtake Japan within the next 1.5 to 2 years. So Hong Kong, as the intelligence hub, as we call it internally for us, is an important hub that allows us to really distribute and work our network in Southeast Asia and throughout mainland China. And it allows us to have subsidiary setups and a hub and spoke system, so to say, all over Asia, with all our manufacturing in Southeast Asia coordinated through Hong Kong globally. So all our product is shipped from Southeast Asian manufacturing bases through a legal entity into North America for distribution in North America, between 34 and 36 million pieces a year. So it's a success story for Coach, having been there in the early years. It's, as I said at the beginning, it's exciting for me to be here. It's exciting for me to participate in this because I've been traveling to Hong Kong since the early 80s and have seen how Hong Kong evolved. In my previous role, Michael mentioned that I used to be based here and work for Hyatt in my previous role with Hyatt. and I spent most of my life in hospitality. Obviously, Hyatt has very large operations in Hong Kong. I think Margie mentioned this morning that her family brought Hyatt into mainland China, and I know that. I remember that very well. So I've been traveling to Hong Kong and to Asia for a long time. It's fun to be back in Chicago because I consider Chicago as my hometown, although I am originally from Austria and I've grew up in Austria. Not Australia, we don't have kangaroos, it's Austria, that small place in Europe. And Chicago to me is hometown. Chicago has something very special. I can openly say this now, living in New York. Compared to New York, of course, Chicago is a very small place. It's like a village, a very clean village. And it's nice to come back here. So with that, I will hand it back to Michael. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Morgan will.
Thanks, Michael. So first of all, I'm a good customer of the Grand Hyatt in Hong Kong, and my wife is a good customer of Coach. So we bring the two of them together there. So lots of good experience on the panels so far today. I would just like to point out, in addition to myself here from JPMorgan, our senior country officer who came in from Hong Kong, Andrew Butcher, has also been in Hong Kong for many, many years of his career. From my perspective, my very first trip to Hong Kong was 23 years ago, and I had just moved to Indonesia where I was running our bank there, and I'll never forget it because that first time I landed in Hong Kong, there were two big wow moments for me. This is back in, I guess, 1992. The first real wow moment, for those of you that were flying into the old TATHK at that time, you'll know very well runway 13, that 47-degree right turn about 1,000 feet above the ground. That's a wow moment in Hong Kong. And the second wow moment that follows once you recover from that turn is you realize, wow, through the skyscrapers, through what's going on in the container port, through the tall apartment buildings built into these beautiful hills, that this is a very special place. And I've been in Hong Kong 4 times already this year, and I can tell you that feeling just never goes away. It is a wow city in many, many different perspectives. For our own firm, for JPMorgan Chase, we've been in Asia for many years, and in Hong Kong for most of those years, a total of 140 years in the Asia-Pacific region, and actually 90 years in Hong Kong. And to give you just a little bit of context of who we are as a financial services firm, we are one of the oldest financial institutions in the United States, a history that goes back greater than 200 years, really right around the time of the founding of our own country. And today it's greater than $2.5 trillion in assets, so a very big company. But one of the interesting things is the global nature of our business and the important role that Hong Kong has played throughout our history. Today, we have a physical presence in more than 60 countries around the world and do business in well more than 100. But Hong Kong has always been at the core of what our business strategy has been, both globally as well as in Asia. So just to give you some perspective, we've got 240,000 employees around the world, many of those in the United States, serving millions of consumers and corporate clients and governments and other financial institutions around the world. But our Hong Kong history is Hong Kong both as a country in and of itself, as a place to do business, but also, as we talk about here, that gateway into the Asia-Pacific region, and not just a gateway into China. Throughout our history, Hong Kong has actually been our main regional office across the Asia-Pacific region. Today, we have more than 4,000 employees in Hong Kong. We operate in 4 different locations there. Lots of operations staff, lots of technology people, lots of bankers. But every major line of business that operates outside the United States is well represented in our firm in Hong Kong and is headquartered, for the most part, also in Hong Kong, whether that be investment banking, asset management, our treasury services, and our transaction processing businesses, our investor services business, commercial banking business. All of them have a very significant presence and typically make their own headquarters within Hong Kong. So why did we do that when we're looking at how an American company like ours has found success in the region and specifically in Hong Kong. Many of the points that you heard earlier today, I'd just love to reinforce. For us, it was clearly a launching pad for the rest of Asia. It was an important foothold for us to have that started well before we were in many other countries around the region. Definitely a gateway to China. For many years before, when China was open, during the period when China was closed to much of the outside world, and then, of course, restarting that. So using our Hong Kong presence as that important gateway has always been important to us. But why the regional headquarters there? Why the biggest presence there? Approximately a third of our total staff in the Asia-Pacific region. Why do we have them there? Well, it's also because of the legal system that works extremely well, a very deep talent pool in Hong Kong, the attractiveness of the city as a place to live and a place to work. I'm always happy when I get stuck in Hong Kong over a weekend on one of my longer Asia trips to have an opportunity to go hiking up the Hong Kong Trail or go out on the water. There's just an incredible diversity from a lifestyle point of view in addition to the business climate that we've been talking about. Also because of the infrastructure that physically exists there that makes a big difference if you're running a regional business. You need to have that kind of infrastructure around you. And increasingly, and not dissimilar to what Gebhard was saying about Coach, it's also become a center of innovation for us. And things that we're doing in Hong Kong, we then are taking back to the United States, or we're doing in Latin America, or we're doing in Europe. And so Hong Kong, as an important source of innovation, has also been important. So over the past 90 years, we've had an opportunity to participate and witness the incredible growth of Hong Kong. And today, to look at it really as New York is the leading financial center in the Americas time zone, London in Europe, Hong Kong clearly has that role in the Asia-Pacific region. There's really no question about the elite peer group that Hong Kong as a place to do business shares, whether that's for finance, investment, different kinds of business services, port traffic, air cargo. We talked about logistics earlier today, and of course tourism. Hong Kong has always been one of the great leading centers and participates at a very elite level around the world. How did that happen? As we look back, and as I've discussed with other colleagues that have done business in Hong Kong for many years, Hong Kong really had an ability to leverage its DNA very early on in its emergence as a powerhouse. Its geographic location, we call it the gateway to Asia, but just its geography, both for China and for Asia overall. The Deepwater Port that was a critical part of its history and its emergence as a trade center. The British legal and the related framework around that in terms of financial and market framework. The bilingual culture of the place. Importantly, and this point was made in one of the earlier panels, a government that enables business and that doesn't compete with you is a very important part, I think, of what makes Hong Kong work so well. And also, Hong Kong has a long history of being able to absorb different kinds of talent, and importantly, to absorb that entrepreneurial spirit that exists. And you see that with Marjorie earlier today. But fundamentally, our business in banking is all about serving our clients and what their financial needs are. So when I was putting together my thoughts for, well, how are overseas companies successful leveraging the Hong Kong platform, I actually reached out to 20 of our clients, American companies, operating who are operating out of a regional office in Hong Kong, to ask them two questions. Number one, why are you based in Hong Kong? And number two, why do you stay? Which I think is just as important, because there are choices in doing that. And some of these companies are multi-billion-dollar publicly held companies that operate all around the world. And at JPMorgan Chase, we also cover much smaller American companies and help them go global. So some of the companies I approached at less than $100 million in revenue and are using Hong Kong as that initial toehold into the Asia-Pacific region. So I asked them the same questions. Why are you there? And why do you stay? So if I could, I'll just share with you some of their verbatim answers, because I found it quite revealing myself. So the answers were, It's a dynamic city. We just wanted to live there, not a bad reason. Very strong growth prospects, both for itself as a center and for the Asia-Pacific region as a whole. A gateway, that word keeps coming up, to opportunities in China. I heard that a lot. It's a regional base for our Asia-Pacific expansion. All of the major cities in Asia that we care about are less than a 4-hour flight away, so it's just geographically convenient. Taxes came up more than once. Low, simple, and predictable was a very common theme of why they're located in Hong Kong. Other company told me it's an international city. We're not that experienced operating globally, and we wanted a place that had a heavy use of English. We thought that would help us as a launching pad. Hong Kong is efficient. You only need to ride the MTR or take what are probably the fastest escalators in the world to understand the pride that Hong Kongers put on efficiency and the pace of life. It's got a world-class business infrastructure. It's got easy recruitment of skilled staff. It's a comfortable home for expats while retaining a very unique culture. It's got about 1,000 flights daily, one of my clients pointed out, that go in and out of the new Hong Kong airport, if you will. The proximity to the Pearl River Delta region, and of course, China's largest manufacturing center, Shenzhen, Dongguan, Guangzhou, those areas very important, and clients of ours are based there that are doing their manufacturing in those cities. Hong Kong provides us with a level playing field for both foreign and local companies. We heard that from Crown today, and there's no foreign ownership restrictions, so it was easier to navigate. And just to wrap up, a couple of the final points were it's one of the least corrupt economies in the world, and we wanted to do business there, and that's a very important point. Very low levels of corruption given areas, other countries in the region. It's got an independent legal system and a clear commitment to the rule of law. It's the cornerstone of its economy is free trade, no tariffs, and we wanted to operate in a place that encouraged that kind of behavior. Hong Kong has been resilient through past economic crises, was another reason given, and we've seen those cycles certainly in Asia over the years. Companies in Hong Kong can enjoy preferred access to China. We talked about the SEPA program earlier today. And the last couple were we're using Hong Kong as our R&D center. We're finding the talent that can do that. Back to my point around innovation. And one client said, Hong Kong is just the place where I go to find talent for my other Asia businesses. And the last point that I think sort of sums it all up that one of our clients shared was, as the world economy pivots to Asia, we use Hong Kong as a platform to tap those opportunities. So they're the voice of the client.
That is, those are powerful voices. I'm not sure that there's a better, there are better voices or better advertisements for Hong Kong. So we're honored today to have Undersecretary Stefan Selig with us. And Undersecretary, I thought it would be terrific to hear from you a little bit about the, I know you spoke earlier, but the U.S.-China relationship, the U.S. relation with Hong Kong and its importance going forward.
Great. Well, I'll not only give a commercial to Hong Kong, but maybe I'll start by giving a little commercial to Chicago. Michael mentioned one of the things that I help look after is the JCCT, which is the Joint Commission of Commerce and Trade, which is our primary commercial dialogue with China, which took place in Chicago last year. And I'm told by some people it was one of the, if not the most successful JCCTs in its 26-year history. And perhaps that was because we took it out of Washington and brought it to Chicago. But it is also actually, and Michael may not know this story, is the very first government minister I met after being confirmed last year was the Assistant Minister of Commerce in Beijing, Assistant Minister Zhang, who now is the Vice Minister of Commerce, Zhang. And we were chatting, and he asked me if I knew people in Chicago because they had done such a good job, and Mayor Emanuel and the Vice Chairman of World Business to Chicago had spent a tremendous amount of time with Chicago, with China, building that commercial relationship. And I said, yes, I'm a very big fan of the mayors, I'm a very big fan of the vice chairmans, and in fact, the relationship started because of the relationship that we both shared with the mayor and the vice chairman. And so thank you for everything that the World Business Chicago is doing and the city is doing for helping to improve and build our relationship with China overall. So there is a second commercial for the morning. Maybe I could just spend a moment talking a little bit about the president's rebalance to Asia, because I think that comes up quite often, and why the administration is so focused on that. And I think, frankly, as somebody who's spent most of my life in business, it's a pretty simple reason, and that reason is because of the economic opportunity and all the growth that is expected to take place in Asia and the entire Asia Pacific. In the next 15 years alone, 3.2 billion middle-class consumers are going to be in Asia. To give you a sense of that opportunity, that is 9 times the size of the entire U.S. population and will represent by far the majority of middle-class consumers around the world. So this is pretty simple. Businesses that want to operate and grow are going to have to be focused on Asia to take advantage of that opportunity. And in China in particular, the combination of the United States and China represents roughly a third of global GDP, roughly a quarter of the world's population, and roughly a fifth of all international trade. So this market is big and it's important and it is growing. At the Department of Commerce, I will tell you, we are all in. We are putting our money where our mouth is. We have 32 separate offices in China and 109 locally employed staff, which is twice as much as we have in any other country. And that presence obviously allows us to facilitate trade missions to China in the region, secure meetings with government officials, and create an important engagement with the public sector. Lastly, I would just argue, mention the economic centerpiece of the president's rebalance is TPP, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, if we were able to get it done, is going to represent 45% of the total export market of the United States. It will represent a comprehensive 21st century agreement that will set the highest standards for open trade and investment, and it will address those things that are not just in traditional trade agreements like tariffs and non-tariff barriers, but will also address emerging new issues that businesses face in the 21st century, like digital trade, supply chain connectivity, and ensuring fair competition with state-owned enterprises. So for all of those reasons, this rebalance is extraordinarily important to the country and such a priority for this administration.
Thank you. So now we're going to open it up to questions. I've been given a number of questions, and I have to say first that Gebhard, you win the popularity contest because you have the largest number of these questions are for you. You're gonna be on the hot seat a little bit. But before we do that, we have a question for Mr. Selig from Dwight Cleveland, and it is actually regarding Warren Buffett's philanthropic pledge. And the question is, what is the best approach for the Chinese with regard to philanthropic support and evolving philanthropic support?
Well, I've been doing this for a year. I haven't gotten that question yet. As a government employee now, I'm probably not necessarily the best person to comment on significant philanthropy. But what I would say is the following. I think at the base and the heart of that question is a recognition of the growth of the Chinese economy, of the wealth creation and prosperity that has taken place in China, and all of the great things that have happened there over the course of the last 25 years. More people have been taken out of poverty in China over the last 25 years than any country in the history of the world. And that is creating great wealth and great opportunity. And with that wealth and opportunity, obviously, comes obligations. And some of those obligations are to give back and to be philanthropic. And I think that's a reflection of the question that was asked. And so while I'm probably not best positioned to give specific advice on this topic, I do think it's going to be a topic that is going to be increasingly relevant as the Chinese economy develops and as opportunities for more of its citizens create real wealth.
I think never having been asked the question before, you did a very nice job. So that's terrific. Gebhard, how does Hong Kong help you with IP protection?
I think it was mentioned a couple of times earlier this morning and also on the panel here. Hong Kong has a judicial system that is absolutely impartial. It provides common law base. It's based on the British system, and through that and through the fact that it's a place where you can do business with the assurance that you're not exposed to business practices that would be real challenging for US businesses. I think we have a very strong base there in terms of protecting IP as well. So we use the legal base in Hong Kong to address IP issues, address trademark issues, which in retail, of course, is a big issue. It's a big issue in China. The good news here is that the Chinese government, not just the Hong Kong government, but the Chinese government actually is very supportive in going after that. I think it's still a long way to go in terms of addressing it effectively. But with a Hong Kong base, you have the legal base to actually have an impartial view on this and have the chance of success of going after issues in IP and trademark.
So, Morgan, Singapore is also a strong candidate as an Asian hub. We heard a lot about the firsthand testimonials of companies that you interviewed. But for a company looking for that Asian hub, what are the sort of specific benefits comparison of Hong Kong as compared to Singapore?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question, and I lived in Singapore for a number of years as well, ran our business there, and this does come up a lot. For starters, Asia is a very large and geographically large and a very diverse region of the world, and it makes sense to have multiple centers where companies can do business, where they can set up their headquarters. A lot of the companies that do locate in Singapore, much like how Hong Kong is a gateway to China, many companies choose Singapore if they have more of a Southeast Asia focus. There's also differences in the major markets. Singapore might be more active in the commodities markets, Hong Kong more in the equities and bond markets. So you've got some basic differences there. There are both places provide very competitive tax regimes. So a lot of it just depends on what your overall Asia strategy is, both in terms of geography, business mix, et cetera. I'd say that Hong Kong has such a deep track record of having multinational companies based there that it has built up a very large and a very diverse talent pool that's relatively easy to tap for almost anything that you need. It has also developed a tremendous expertise being part of China that I'd say would be greater than what you could find in a Singapore. Singapore has probably among the best bilateral tax treaties with different countries around the world. I think that's an area that Hong Kong continues to focus on. I think Hong Kong's also focused in infrastructure, building out its own infrastructure. Singapore has done that, of course, for many years. So I'd say you boil it down to kind of what your own company's strategy is. Is it more geographically focused? Is it more China or broader Southeast Asia focused? And then those pieces start to fall into place.
Great. So we've got a question from James Strauss of Holtz, Indiana, and it's actually it's a challenging question. So I'm going to put it out there, and I think that a number of people may have some value to add there. But with rising labor costs, materials costs, and changes in exchange rates, the previous spreads or margins for doing business with Hong Kong and throughout Asia have been squeezed. Logistics costs and timing required for delivery of goods is also been under pressure. What do you see Hong Kong doing? What do you see the region doing? And perhaps for Undersecretary Selig, how will TPP help to combat these trends?
Maybe I start up with a comment there. I think what Hong Kong does and what the development around Hong Kong does is, and it was mentioned by Marjorie this morning, is really the qualitative focus. I think the change in the consumer market towards much more awareness of the qualitative aspect of product, specifically in retail, outweighs or is more and more outweighing the fact that labor arbitrage is becoming a lesser focus area. Labor arbitrage, as it has shown over the last 20 years, is a fairly short-lived effect that you can take advantage of. What it does is it forces you to move your base, your manufacturing base, periodically. And with shrinking yields, this is becoming more and more a challenge. So the qualitative aspect is extremely important to have it combined with an environment that allows you a legal base where you have an objective view of your own business.
Yep, I'd say certainly the rising labor costs has been a huge impact on companies and causing them to change their business models in Hong Kong and in China in particular. You certainly see that in the coastal cities in China with wage increases 15-20% a year. And if you've got labor as a high percentage of your cost of producing those goods, that has a major impact on the business. We see this with apparel companies typically as the leading indicators where they need to move to different regions. And we've clearly seen that movement out of Hong Kong into China and then now out of China into other areas around Asia that were discussed earlier. To make a higher cost environment work, you have to target the appropriate business strategy. You don't go to New York City, where I live, looking for low-cost labor either. You need to invest in productivity. You need to position your products at a certain high end. There's a lot of different components that go into that. One of the interesting dynamics that I've seen over the last 20 years or so in Hong Kong and in the southern part of China has been the dramatic increase in productivity by investing in more automation. So not positioning a business to be in Hong Kong or in China, looking for low-cost labor, that's just not the winning business model at all anymore. I've seen robotics today in factories that 15, 20 years ago were all people. In fact, in some cases, 5 and 7 years ago, it was all people, and now we're seeing more robotics. So again, in order to compete with that kind of a cost environment, and the flip side of China becoming more of a consumer-driven economy is that wages are going to go up in China. You're clearly going to see that. So the flip side of that is you have to make those investments in productivity. You've got to get those gains in your business in order to survive, and as many companies have done, not only survive, but really prosper.
So you mentioned currency markets and TPP, and I'd say a couple of things. One is, as all of you know, the dollar has strengthened significantly against most major currencies over the last year. This is creating real headwinds for U.S. companies to export. In fact, over the course of the first 3 or 4 months of this year, year-over-year exports are down, roughly 2.5%, largely as a result of the appreciating dollar. As a result of that, I think it increases the focus and the pressure for us to do everything we can to help U.S. companies enter those markets more effectively. And we think that the primary way to do that is through giving U.S. companies greater access to those markets and providing a level playing field for U.S. companies to compete in those markets for their world-class products and services. And the best way to do that is through trade agreements. And the centerpiece of that is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, which we're currently negotiating today, given the size of those markets that I mentioned earlier. So I think actually the The focus on this now is even more timely and more appropriate. TPP, there's Trade Promotion Authority, TPA, which is potentially coming up for a vote this Friday, and this is the ability, which, as I mentioned in my remarks earlier today, every president since FDR, almost every president since FDR, has had Trade Promotion Authority. And this is the ability for the president and his negotiators to negotiate a trade agreement, obviously with the advice of and guidance from Congress, and then to take it to Congress for an up or down vote. It is sometimes called fast-track authority. And our ability to get TPA done, while it is not required to negotiate TPP, I believe it will be significantly challenging for us to get TPP done unless we get TPA through Congress, and hopefully that will happen shortly.
Thank you. For Undersecretary Selig, do you have a view as to the areas of the service industry and the service economy that are most important today in China and Hong Kong? And that's from Bernadette.
Well, we've actually just last year had a record level of services trade with Hong Kong and with China. And so given the size of our economy and, as Morgan has mentioned, given the fundamental change that we expect to see in the Chinese economy, we think the increase in services is going to be extraordinarily important for both countries going forward. With respect to what area of services, really it spans the gamut. It is everything from architectural services, for example, to insurance, financial services, insurance amongst other things for United States companies. But it is such an important part of our economy that it is something that we're very focused on, and amongst other places, this is being currently discussed in the bilateral investment treaty, which we are in the process of negotiating with China.
So, Gebhard, this is on this concept of services and service expansion. How can high net worth financial services, Morgan, you may have a view here as well, benefit from the marketing lessons throughout Asia of the luxury brands?
That's a very interesting question. I think it's, when you look at the experience or the evolution of how luxury brands have evolved within the China market, the Southeast Asia and the China market itself, I think the lesson there is really that as much as those countries are developing and evolving, brands have to evolve with it. And a prime example of this has been China over the last 12 to 18 months or 24 months now, with the anti-corruption campaign that the government has started, which has had a huge impact on the luxury market, on the luxury goods market. Much more so at the high end, lesser in the middle, but it did have a tremendous impact, not just in terms of government employees, but more so in terms of the evolving middle class and the perspective and view that has been formed and is formulated on what luxury goods are. And it brings you back to the focus on quality and the focus on that service extension and building the emotional bond between product and consumer to explain what the relationship of value and product is, value and quality is. And I think it's a very important lesson to learn for all. Initially, many brands go into these markets with the goal of very high pricing. There are price differentials which are tremendous between home market and international market. There are huge profit spans initially in these markets, but those are very short-term or short to medium-term views. For a long-term view on brand building within those markets, you really have to understand and go with what the consumer evolution is going to be.
So I'm going to give next question and then try to put my CEO hat on and address the question that was just asked of Gebhard and this next question, which is says that for a small business, developing a market in Hong Kong and China seems very differentiated, very expensive, and it is said that the business must have deep pockets to weather the storm. And please comment. So our business has had operations in Hong Kong and in China for the last 5 years or so, 7 years. Not the type of history that we see with JPMorgan, and not the depth that we see with a Coach. And I can tell you firsthand from our experience that first and foremost, and it's not just advertisement, it's true that the Hong Kong Trade Development Corporation is there to help. Second, we found a marketplace that was interested in what we had to offer as a business, wanted to see the type of commitment to the region and ultimately the type of investment in the region that we have today, but was not, for our experience, unrealistic or unfair in terms of the timing of that commitment and the timing of that investment. So understanding that we needed to be certain that we had a market, that we had business opportunity, and that while we needed a presence and we needed to keep going back, we were able to go back and open up that market without a major capital investment until we knew that we had enough business to weather the storm. And that's been our experience in Hong Kong. It's been our experience in China and accessing China, Greater China from Hong Kong. And I think it's instructive. When we now go to the prior question about what can, and we don't market to the high net worth community, it's an institutional asset management firm, but what can the luxury goods companies teach us about marketing financial services in the region? And to me, sort of taking on Gebhard's comments, it really gets down to what differentiates us as smaller, mid-sized financial services firms. And I really believe that it is culture. Proprietary intellectual product is tough to come by, particularly in the world of financial services. Good ideas are socialized very, very quickly. But culture is an enduring asset for a service business, just as culture is and that brand and that statement of quality is an enduring and critical, the most valuable asset for luxury goods. And I will say that we were able Hong Kong for us was a great place to be able to find and part and match our culture to be able to expand into Asia. And it goes back to some of Morgan's comments earlier, some of Gebhard's comments, but one of the great advantages of Hong Kong is the fact that you can, I think, first of all, there's a tremendous culture there, and you can find your culture, I think, quite easily in Hong Kong, which is critical to succeeding.
Michael, maybe I could just use this opportunity to do a quick commercial for the International Trade Administration and talking about the importance and challenges facing SMEs relative to larger firms. So we all know SMEs are not as well capitalized as large firms, and as a result, they're less able to withstand early losses. They're not equipped with the sort of market intelligence that big firms have. And they're not necessarily as well equipped to easily advocate for themselves in the context of resolving disputes and entering into new, often complicated markets. And as a result of that, SMEs often lack the knowledge, experience, and confidence to invest in new markets and in global markets. And I guess more to the point, large firms, frankly, have the financial flexibility and fail more easily, where for an SME, going into a new market can be, frankly, existential. And that's really the commercial, which is we have 109 people, as I mentioned earlier, in offices around China, which are there to help you. This is an unbelievably valuable resource that, frankly, is not particularly well known to businesses and SMEs around the country. Frankly, before I was asked by the president to play this role, I was not familiar with everything we do to help SMEs succeed in global markets. SMEs are at the heart of what we are doing at the Department of Commerce and in the International Trade Administration. So I hope you will take advantage of the services and the dedicated staff and team that we have to allow you to be more successful and address the risks and uncertainties as you enter new markets.
Can I just pick up on that point? 'Cause I think that's really an excellent point, and also I support the advertisement. Trade.gov is a very powerful place to go to get information doing business around the world, and we refer clients to it and use it ourselves all the time. Over the last 10 years, we started a new initiative in Hong Kong and a few other countries where we actually opened up our international branch network to more of these smaller and medium-sized American companies that wanted to do business overseas. And much of our history had been covering the very large companies that went global. And very much like what Michael just described, there are unique challenges that a smaller company faces when operating globally, particularly when operating in a complex environment like a China. And what we found, and certainly what we have encouraged those clients, is to use Hong Kong as your launching pad to get into China. The expertise is there, the capital is there, potential partners are there as a way to learn how to navigate the complexity of the Chinese market. You have very similar cultures, obviously highly entrepreneurial approach to doing business. And we found that to be a very successful strategy for those companies that don't have the resources of a very large multinational. It is a big deal for them if this venture were to fail. They're privately held companies. It's the owner's money that's at risk. These are very important decisions. And so we found encouraging that use of Hong Kong, and we support that through bankers that we have in Hong Kong as well, but using Hong Kong as that platform is a great way to enter the Chinese market if you just don't have the experience yet in China.
Thank you. So I'm getting the we're out of time sign, and so I unfortunately we're going to have to wait to hear the answer to the last question for Gebhard, which was whether or not you brought samples of Coach products for all of the attendees like Marjorie Yang did. So you can find Gebhard outside here and talk to him about the samples when we're done. I just want to say that for me, again, thank you to the Hong Kong Trade Development Corporation for being here, for bringing this conference here. Thank you to all of you for being here today. As one who remembers that palpable, that landing into TATHK that Morgan talked about, I think it's quite clear that Hong Kong still has that palpable sense of energy that it had back then, and it doesn't come from a 45-degree bank turn where you can read the labels on laundry anymore. It comes from the economic vibrancy, energy of the city and the people. It may not be the only place to operate in Asia out of, but it is still a fantastic place for us, the best place to operate out of, and certainly for certain types of high-value functions. Gebhard and Morgan both spoke about this. It is a terrific place to operate out of. So we're thrilled to have you here today to host this conference and look forward to increasing the trade and the relationship between Chicago and Hong Kong. And thank you all very much, and it's time for lunch. So thanks.